This week on the Writers Detective Bureau, next of kin notifications, is the noir genre dead and money laundering? I'm Adam Richardson, and this is the Writers Detective Bureau. Welcome to episode number 2 of the Writers Detective Bureau podcast, which is dedicated to helping authors and screenwriters just like you with the craft of writing crime-related fiction. You can submit your own questions at writersdetective.com/podcast. Before we get into this week's listener questions, I would like to wish a gigantic thank you to Joan Raymond at joanraymondwriting.com. She is my very first patron over at patreon.com. This show would not be possible without the support of listeners like Joan. Most listeners of this show are writers, and we all know that writers make the best readers. So please consider checking out Joan's website at joanraymondwriting.com to learn more about her work. If you'd like to support the Writers Detective Bureau podcast for as little as $2 a month, or to learn more about how you can set up your own Patreon page, go to writersdetective.com/Patreon. That's Patreon. Richard Harris asks, how do police handle it when they need to inform someone of a friend or family member's death? That is an excellent question, and it's one of those things that we also often see portrayed incorrectly in television and movies. We don't do it by telephone. We go out and contact that family member or that close family friend in person. And very often we will bring a chaplain with us as well. And if you read any of Michael Connelly's books, you'll hear him refer to it as the dirty work. And it really is one of the absolute worst parts of the job. So the thing about doing this that makes it so tough is that you have to be clear with what you're telling the person. So you can't him and haw and beat around the bush or use euphemisms for death. You literally have to, you can't say passed on or is no longer with us. And it's like, what does that mean? You literally have to say that your loved one is dead or your loved one has died. And it's incredibly tough, especially if you are trying to get key information from the person that you're talking to. I have been in the situation where I had to ask questions about this decedent from a roommate in order to get enough information to find out how to contact the next of kin, the family members, because the only lead I had as far as who to talk to was an 18-year-old. So I had to ask questions when this person, all they wanted to know was where their friend was. And the reality is that once you tell them that their friend or their loved one is gone, very often they are not going to be answering any more questions. And so you have to balance that, and then you have to be very clear and concise as to what you're telling them. Very often, once you say that your loved one is dead, it's like you've flipped a switch. And from that point, it is all range of emotions. I've had it delayed reaction where it was as if I told them that we needed to repair a fender on the car. It was like, okay, well, how much is it going to cost me? That kind of reaction. And it was one of disbelief and trying to hold it together, and trying to be still coherent in that delayed reaction. And I've also seen it into outright immediate crying and sobbing and wailing of, why this happened. So you can't judge what the emotional reaction of the person is. There's no way to know what it's going to be. And the way that reaction occurs is not necessarily a reflection on the relationship that they had or if there was any involvement in the death by that person. We all handle grief, and we certainly all handle immediate notifications of traumatic incidents in very different ways. So as a writer, you realistically can portray it from 1,000 different angles, and I don't think anyone can say that is wrong, because I've seen quite a few different reactions from all different sides of the spectrum when somebody learns that their next of kin has died, or a close family member or friend. Thank you so much for your question, Richard, and I appreciate you taking the time to submit it. This week's writer's resource actually stems from a question I received from Colin Monroe. Colin asked, can noir, hard-boiled thrillers still be fresh and relevant, or has it all been done already? Well, I think the first part would be to answer this question, which is I would never underestimate a genre from being done already. I mean, we've had TV cop shows pretty much as far back as TV's been around, and they continue to come out. So I don't think a noir, hard-boiled thriller could ever be completely ruled out. Being fresh and relevant, I mean, I've read time and time again that what Hollywood is looking for is the same but different. So if you, as a writer, can come up with a fresh and relevant way to do hard-boiled thrillers, I think you are definitely going to have a following. Which brings us to this week's writer's resource. As I was researching this question for Colin, I stumbled upon an article called What is Hard-Boiled Crime Fiction? Over at murder-mayhem.com. And it was a great article that covers exactly what hard-boiled crime fiction is. And we're talking the private detective that's the loner that does things his way. Just, it's such an American old school type of dime store novel story with, like, Raymond Chandler is a perfect example of that kind of writing. If anything, I think that Hollywood would love for the genre to be reinvented. Anytime that you can come up with a novel way of redoing something that was a fan favorite decades ago, you are on to something golden. So I definitely recommend you check out this website and certainly this article. It was written in January of 2018 by Otto Penzler, and the website is murder-mayhem.com, murder-mayhem.com. Now, if you're driving and you don't want to try to pull over and write down all this stuff, you can just go to writersdetective.com/2 for the show notes from this episode, and you'll get the link right there. Thanks for the question, Colin, and I hope this reference proves useful. Barry Finley at barry-finlay.com sent in a great question. What is money laundering, and can you give concrete examples of cases in which the perpetrators have been convicted? Well, the first part of the question is much simpler to answer, which I will do in just a second, but I will jump to the second half, which is the concrete examples of cases. I don't know any off of the top of my head as I'm answering this, but if you go to the show notes, if you go to writersdetective.com/2, I will make sure to include some links to some notable money laundering investigations where there were convictions. All right, now back to the original question. What is money laundering? Money laundering is when you have an illegal enterprise. Let's use drug dealing as an example, where you are illegally selling drugs and you now have a surplus of money and you want to be able to use the money, but you can't really show a legitimate way that you received this money. You know, if I was working as a detective and I had an extra $300,000 in income in my account, people would really wonder where that money came from. And, you know, much like what we saw in Breaking Bad, you have this big heap of money and no way to show where it came from. So money laundering is an attempt to make that money look legitimate. And very often that's done through businesses. The way that's very often done is either through creating businesses that are not actually conducting business. They only appear to be conducting business on paper, meaning false invoices that show money coming in and false expenses that show money coming out, or expenditures or rent, that kind of thing. Or it is using a legitimate business that is actually in existence and then creating either fake clients to show, again, a false income, a plausible explanation for why this money is coming into the business. And obviously, this customer doesn't exist. It just looks like they exist because their money is coming in. And then you are trying to make it appear on paper that it's all legitimate. So you could kind of think of it as the opposite of tax evasion. Tax evasion would be you bring in more money than you're telling the government. So let's say you own a cash business, like you own a car wash or you own a vending machine company, where there's no way for the government to actually know exactly how much money is coming in because it's not credit card transaction stuff. You may kind of underreport the amount of money that comes in. With money laundering, it is the exact opposite. You're over-reporting the amount of money that comes in to make it look like it's legitimate. And then once it's seen as legitimate, then you're much more free to go using that money to make purchases or to use it to show a positive income to obtain real estate, that kind of thing. So again, I don't have any immediate examples of that, but I will make sure to post some in the show notes. And then a great fictional story to see where money laundering is one of the core parts of the plot is the show Ozark, starring Jason Bateman and Laura Linney, I believe. It's on one of the streaming services. I can't remember if it's Netflix or not, but definitely check it out. It was extremely well done. And if you're looking to binge on something for the week and you want something that's almost as good as Breaking Bad, I would definitely check it out. And it's a great example of money laundering. Thanks again for your question, Barry. I appreciate you and your taking the time to submit this. Kelly Ethan from kellyethan.com writes, I'm from Australia, writing for the U.S. market. I'm currently writing a cozy murder mystery set in Maine. I would like to know about the process once a suspect is arrested for murder, and can they get out on bail? Great questions, Kelly. So the first part is, once a suspect is arrested, they would then most likely be transported to the station for an interview. If they decide that they do want to talk, then obviously that would take place. If they want an attorney, they might wait until an attorney shows up for that interview, or they may just book them in custody, which is much more likely. So at any rate, they would ultimately end up in jail, where they would go through the booking process, which would be taking a booking photo, also called a mugshot. They would have their fingerprints done. The modern way of doing so is using a live scan machine or something similar, where it's almost like a gigantic copy machine where you put your fingers down on glass panels and your fingerprints are digitally taken. So they don't quite use, we still use fingerprint cards and ink and rolling fingerprints the old-fashioned way when we have to, but usually for the modern day, it's done by computer because it's tied into the fingerprint systems that way. They may also do a DNA buccal swab or buccal swab, however you want to pronounce it, buccal, where it's essentially a sterile Q-tip that goes inside the cheek where the DNA is then swabbed. Depending upon the state, there may be different rules as far as who gets the DNA swab done during booking and whether it's booking for a felony or not. And then I think there are some states where they are trying to have that only happen after a conviction. So I don't know what the status is of Maine. So you might refer to that as to whether or not DNA sample is taken at booking. It's very possible that your suspect may have already been subject to a search warrant for their DNA in a murder case. So that would have happened before they get to jail. So once they're in jail, they would then go to a court appearance, usually within 48 hours or 2 court days. So if they were booked on a Friday or Saturday, then Monday or Tuesday at the absolute latest, they would appear before a judge and enter a plea of guilty, not guilty, or nolo contendere, which is no contest, which is essentially a guilty plea, but a guilty plea that has no bearing on a civil trial. If the victim's family were to file a wrongful death suit, then it would not weigh the same as a guilty conviction. Could they get out on bail? Yes. Once they've been booked into jail, depending on the kind of murder that it is, meaning the circumstances and what the detective and or prosecutor are alleging on the booking paperwork will determine whether or not they are eligible for bail. And there are certain kinds of murder that actually do have bail set. And bail is usually set by a bail schedule. So if you were to find the county in Maine where your story is going to take place, type in the county name, Maine, and then the word bail schedule, and you should see a list of all of the bail amounts for all of the different crimes that you could be booked into jail for. And whatever that murder section is, there will probably be a dollar amount somewhere above $1 million, either 1 million or 2 million. I think it's 2 million where I am in California for just straight murder. And then if there are other extenuating circumstances or special circumstances that if the state has a capital punishment, that may make it a no bail murder. So they would not be able to bail out. Like if they used poison or they were lying in wait or, there are a couple other factors, then it's possible that there would be no bail. But there are sections of murder that do have a bail amount set for them. And then a quick side note just to explain bail in the United States system. Bail is essentially collateral to allow you to be released to ensure that you're going to show up in court. So essentially for your murder suspect, if they have a $2 million bail, they would have to put down $2 million. And I believe you could actually use real estate. So if they have a $2 million home, they could use that home as collateral to essentially ensure that they are going to show up for court when they are due. And if they don't, then they lose their house or they lose that $2 million. Not many people have $2 million laying around to use in the case of bail. So this is where bail bondsmen come in, or bail bond companies. I shouldn't say bail bondsmen. So a bail bond company would use it's generally 10% across the United States. So for a 10% non-refundable fee, because they are a business, they will then put down the bail money for you, and that is called a bail bond. So if you're booked in jail for a $2 million bail, you don't have $2 million, but you have 10% of that, which is $200,000, then you could then spend $200,000 to get a bail bond company to post a $2 million bail bond on your behalf to allow you to get released. Now, you're not going to get that $200,000 back. It's much more feasible if it is, say, a $5,000 bail and you're going to spend $500 to get out of custody and then have your court date get pushed back. But $200,000 is a lot of money to not see again because that is a fee. So when you see episodes of Dog the Bounty Hunter out chasing people down and putting them in jail, those are people that Beth, his wife, as the bail bond company, they put down their money to let this person out of custody in exchange for the fee. So when somebody skips out on bail, then that means that bail bond company is on the hook for that amount. So if your murder suspect fled and a bail bond company was left with a $2 million bail bond being forfeited, they're definitely going to hire bounty hunters, or the more professional term is fugitive recovery agent. They're going to go out hunting for this person to get them into custody. And then once they are in custody, that money then gets released back to the bail bond company. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. And thank you again, Kelly, for the question. I appreciate you taking the time. And again, you can find Kelly's work at kellyethan.com. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Writers Detective Bureau podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe. If you belong to a writers group, in person or online, I would love it if you'd share this podcast. This podcast is created for you. So don't be shy and submit your crime fiction questions, or just say hello at writersdetective.com/podcast. Thanks again for listening. Write well.